Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I'm your host, David Russell. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com. Hey, is something going wrong with one of the behaviors or habits of somebody on your team? We have these 4 to 6 minute micro learning animated episodes, usually have some humor in them, on Habitly. They can be a great way to just dive in, look at something real quick, and come away and say, hey, considering these best practices, would you have behaved differently in that situation? Check it out, Habitly.com, 7 days free, can't go wrong. Today's episode is with Tonya Thomas, and she runs a company called Team Delegate. They have virtual assistants in the United States that work with people across the country. And she wants to share her expertise on how to do this right. How do you work with a virtual assistant? How do you make that successful and free up time in your day and grow your organization? Let's dive in. Tanya, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to hear your perspective on virtual assistants and how to do this well. I think it's something many companies are moving towards. But why don't you take a moment here, introduce yourself to the audience, and then let's dive into the conversation.
Sure. I am obviously Tonya Thomas. I'm the founder and CEO of Team Delegate, and we are an executive virtual assistant company. So we provide remote executive assistant services to small business owners and entrepreneurs. And I've been in this industry for over 21 years now.
Wow. Over that span of time, how many people have you placed with people who needed executive assistants? What would you guess? Or do you have an exact number?
I don't have an exact number. And for about 18 of those years, I was solo. So I've been in the space of the agency model for the past 3 years.
Oh, okay. And, has there been a big uptick in the number of virtual assistants since COVID?
I would say so, because obviously you have a lot of people who are now wanting to work remotely and full time and be home and not hybrid. So there has been an uptick in the industry, but I've seen that over the course. Obviously, I've been in it for so many years, because when I first started, I think in 2000 it was, the majority of the people didn't even know what it was. And so you spend a lot of time trying to educate people. But over the span of those years, a lot of people have entered the industry.
So what's the biggest challenge in getting a virtual assistant?
You mean challenge in terms of if you're looking for one?
Well, that's a good point. I asked it too broad. So let's say you're making the decision, do I have a virtual assistant or do I have someone working in my office with me? And by the way, I should let the audience know, I have had a virtual assistant, actually had some issues. And then I'm moving on to a new one on Monday, which I'm very excited about, this new person. And but this whole thought process of, do I get someone in my office or do I work with someone who's not in my office? They're virtual, they're online, they're whatever. How do people make that decision? What are the challenges? What do they give up by not having somebody in the office? What do they gain by having somebody remote?
Sure. And usually what I tell people when making that decision, I think it depends upon your needs in terms of, for example, if you're someone that needs someone instantly, everything needs to be instant turnaround, virtual assistance is not for you, then you do need someone in the office that's solely dedicated to you only. And I think the benefits, of course, in terms of working with a virtual assistant is it's time on task. So from that standpoint, you paying someone only when they're working on something for you versus someone being in the office, even their coffee breaks or bathroom break, any downtime that they have, you're paying for that. And then also, of course, if they want benefits and things of that nature, then you're paying for that as well if they're W-2.
Now, the people that you work with as virtual assistants, are they only U.S. based or are some of them in other countries?
U.S. based only.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that's interesting. And so when I'm going to work with someone and they're virtual, I would assume they're always in a different city or a different state, correctly? I'm not going to work with someone virtually who's 5 miles from my office.
Correct. Typically,
Okay.
yeah, they're somewhere else in the country. Yes.
So similar to in-person executive assistants or virtual assistants, there's different work styles that people have, different personalities, different behaviors, different habits, whatever it might be. How do you avoid a clash and kind of confirm that synergy, first of all, in the hiring process, and then after that, as I go through working with this person day by day, week by week?
Sure. We use, different things to be able to glean that, because you're right. It's not only skill set, there's work style as well. So we have questionnaires where we glean and get that information from people to learn, how they like to work. And so we use that information to be able to help make the match, to make sure that they are getting someone who's similar to their work style as well.
Okay. And are there any things that you do as part of the interview process, either on your side or that you recommend a client does, to confirm that that's going to be a good match?
Of course, you want to have, questions in terms of, for example, how do you like to communicate? How often do you like to communicate? Those things are important because they could be clashes. If somebody typically likes Zoom meetings and someone else doesn't, they prefer phone or email only. So those are things that could definitely, from a work style standpoint, be problematic if you're not on the same page. So those are just a couple of examples. So questions to ask like that, how do you like to communicate? I think that's a big one when you're thinking about work style.
Okay. And then you mentioned earlier that, if you need immediate turnaround, a virtual assistant's not the right way to go. So I'm not sure I understand that. So are you saying that if I have a virtual assistant, they're working only part-time for me, or can I have a virtual person that's working all time? So if they're working totally for me, then I should be able to get that quick turnaround. But I'm trying to understand, are you only representing people that work part-time as virtual assistants, or do some of them work full-time for an individual?
We don't offer full-time. And in my experience of being a virtual assistant for the 18 years that I was never full-time for someone. I think you may see a lot of that with overseas because of the cost difference. But in terms of US-based ones, I rarely see people having somebody for 40 hours a week. So that's the only thing that I can speak on. So, for example, a lot of our clients are either 10 hours a week, 15 or 20, something like that. So, yes.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And then how are the hours tracked?
The assistants track their time. And so clients, we make clients privy of the time that they utilize, but it is tracked using technology. So clients can see it. There's a lot of time tracking apps out there. So having the ability to be able to track it that way.
And are they required to enter their time as they go, along with some notes on what they're doing? Or is it something where they can enter that at the end of the day or the end of the week?
We're very transparent. It's as you go, because I don't think that entering time in like after the fact a lot of times cannot be very accurate. So it's as you go.
Okay. And does your company monitor that to make certain that they're doing that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm curious if I'm going to have this virtual assistant, what should I be prepared as my time commitment for how I'm going to have to prepare and communicate and follow up on work that I give to this person?
That's a big issue there, I think, for a lot of people too. So that's a good question. Because a lot of people you're bringing someone on because you're busy, but still when it comes to delegating, there's still some effort on your part, which I think a lot of people don't realize that you can't just abdicate things. The communication needs to be there. So I do tell people to plan and set aside time, even if you have to time block, to make sure that you communicate with your assistant, even if it's 10 minutes in the first thing in the morning, something like that, but still set aside time. Because of course, if they have questions and you're not available for those questions, you're bottlenecking their progress, which of course is going to bottleneck the work that you want them to do for you.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then what do you see as the most effective way for someone when I'm working with a virtual assistant, and let's say they're not as productive as I like, or they're making mistakes or whatever. So how do I deal with that versus how I would deal with an employee who is not living up to my standards in some way?
And then you have to be careful with that in terms of, well, too, because if they're contractor versus W-2, so there's a big difference there. And that's not my expertise, but just keeping that information in mind as well. But if someone is making a lot of mistakes, usually what I say is they're probably not the right fit for you. But nobody's perfect. So every now and then somebody may have a mix up or something like that. But I think it still comes down to always going back first and evaluating how you gave those directions. Was it something that you could have done or said differently? And if you find that there was something, maybe you weren't as clear as you could have been, but I always tell people to look there first. But if, you see, well, yeah, I did give excellent direction, they just drop the ball on it. But that's the advice that I typically give.
Okay. And, if I'm going to work with somebody virtually, probably not going to ever meet them in person. And is there anything that I should be aware of as far as protecting my files, my intellectual property? I'm going to give them access to things. I would assume I'm not going to just throw them things one at a time. If they're really going to be productive, they're going to need to access some things. So what type of protections do I need, if any, that are different with a virtual person versus somebody in my office?
Of course, there's always the non-disclosure, having someone sign that if you want to make sure in terms of an intellectual property that they're going to keep that stuff private. And then also there's different platforms out there that in terms of password sharing and stuff like that you can use if you're not comfortable just directly giving someone your password. So there are things out there that you can do, but again, it just depends upon your comfort level. Some people are okay with just giving that stuff to somebody and some aren't, and they want to use the protections of like the LastPasses and stuff like that to share passwords. So I think, again, it just depends upon the individual.
Okay. And, I'm thinking once again of when I'm hiring or when I'm engaging with this contractor. And so what are the key attributes you see in these virtual assistants that make some really superstars versus others that may be average or not work out?
Sure. Definitely having the ability to utilize technology and pick up on technology quickly, because when you're working remotely, you have to be able to do that because you're not in the same office. So you are using different applications to be able to work remotely. And then also attention to detail. You, as an assistant, regardless of whether you're remote or in person, attention to detail is paramount as well. So I think those are the two larger areas to look at.
So how do you test for that? So I'm talking with a contractor and behaviorally, they seem like they're okay. Maybe I've had some conversations where I confirm they're a fit with our company culture, but now I've got technology skills, and then maybe I've got attention to detail or writing skills. Do you, as an organization in vetting these people, test them on their skill level in those three areas of technology and detail orientation and then communication skills? Or do you leave that to the client? And if so, what have you seen the clients do that is very effective to confirm their expectations in those areas.
Well, yeah, that's a big plus of working with a company like mine, like an agency, because we do that. And without going into details in terms of giving away, what we do, but we do those things. We vet them in that manner in terms to make sure that they have those skill sets that I just talked about.
Well, so I'm not asking you to give away any proprietary, trade secrets type of thing. But can you put a little more meat on the bone? Can you give us some detail? I mean, what type of process do you go through to confirm their technology skills, their attention to detail, and how they communicate?
We do testing. And then, so when someone comes on, we, of course, interview them. And then we do, testing on them to make sure that they have a skill set that they need to be able to be good assistants, and go from there.
Okay. And, you've been doing this a long time. So obviously you've seen situations that have been a big turnaround, very positive, met a need, saved the company money. Do you have any of those examples that you can share with the audience so they can kind of see whether they relate to those situations?
Sure. One client in particular that I can think about came to us. For him, he was trying to grow his company. I think it may have been him and maybe one or two other employees, but he was struggling. He had an engineering firm. He was struggling with meeting the people that he needed to meet with, getting them on his calendar, his email. He missed a lot of emails, so things were just kind of slipping through the cracks. So we put him with an executive virtual assistant who was able to develop, he could say, my assistant's copy on this email should get you on my calendar. She set up systems for his email to alert him to high and mid-tier emails. Those things were huge for him. Eventually, over time, he began to give her other things, helping with his invoicing, some other things that she would do as well. I think some of the onboarding with some of his employees. Now he has, I think, 20 plus employees. But he was telling me, that she was very instrumental in him getting his business to where it is today. That was 4 years ago. So that's a good example there. Another example, a client came to us. She's a coach. Her business was newer as well, but for her, she was already working 60 plus hours a week, even though it was growing. And so she didn't want to work like that. So we paired her with an assistant who was able to help her in terms of also her onboarding. She thought was a little antiquated. The assistant helped her automate some of that, helped her as she began to do her speaking engagements, help her create her decks, scheduling, a lot of different things that was helpful and instrumental for her to be able to reduce her workload.
Okay, well, that's great. So talk to me candidly. What are some of the mistakes that people make when they hire a virtual assistant? What are those mistakes that either in the hiring process? Let's start with that. In the hiring process, what mistakes do people commonly make that you have to watch out for and help them avoid?
I think a lot of times, and I've mentioned this before, and I don't know if people follow me, they see me talk about this all the time. I think it still has to do with the communication. That's where it is for me, like I mentioned earlier, in terms of the delegating. I think that's the biggest piece of it, where it goes left a lot of times. And again, it's when you give someone something, make sure that you've given it to them in a manner that it's clear and concise, and then not just forgetting about it. Staying in touch with them as they work through the process. For example, say you give somebody a long-term project and some research. Instead of just giving them the research and saying, okay, hey, can you have this done for me? Say it's Monday. Can you have this done for me by next Monday? Then never checking in, never saying, okay, at least get this much done, and then we'll have a meeting to see if you're on track with what I need. But a lot of people will do what I just said and just give them that, and then come around on next Monday, and then they give them the work, and it's nothing that they thought it would be. Well, okay, all that time has been spent, and it's too late, and the person's upset. But, having that milestone where you can check in with them, I think is paramount. I think the communication when you're delegating.
I think that's a great point, both for, in-person employees, but particularly, especially with the virtual ones. And I teach my clients that, when you have a project like that, that's a week or a month or several months, you break it into milestones, like you said, multiple milestones. So do 10% or 20% or 5%, depending on how big it is. And then report into me, put the onus on them to report in. So as you said, you can see the work they're doing and confirm they're doing the quality, they're headed in the right direction, they're doing the right type of work. And you can pivot, you can make a course adjustment pretty easily when they're 10 or 20% behind or not up to quality standards, whatever it might be, versus, as you indicated, you wait that entire week and you say, okay, give me the research project, and either they don't have it or they have it in a format that's less than you expected. And which may be, to be fair, you made assumptions instead of communicating part of it because you emphasized, really make certain you communicate, confirm they understand what you're giving them to do. And part of the onus responsibility may be on you, just that you did not communicate it well. But also, when you give it to people and say, okay, I want 10% done or whatever it is by this date, by this time. So like instead of saying by Tuesday at 3 p.m., because otherwise Tuesday may mean midnight to them and you're thinking
Right.
3 p.m., right?
Exactly.
And so it comes back to that communication piece. And super important, but when you manage that way, and especially with virtual people, it's extremely helpful. And I think it's great that you're using time tracking apps. So if I'm wondering, has that person done anything on my project? I can access the time tracking app, and it doesn't just say worked 43 minutes, but it has a description on what they worked on. And I assume, correct me if I'm wrong here, Tanya, but you're also training your people that when you enter that description, it's specific. So
Right.
I finished the first XYZ of this project. Is that right?
Correct. Because, for example, we do a lot of scheduling, like calendar management. They can't just put calendar management 30 minutes. It has to be specific as who they were scheduling for. So, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a huge one. What about the situation where I've got a virtual assistant, and one of the important things for them, as far as me fully engaging them, is that they feel like they're learning, they're growing, they're developing their skill set or advancing their career. Does that happen very often, or are the people who are these virtual assistants kind of comfortable where they're at and that's not a big deal to them?
I think it does for some. Some, of course, are, maybe a bit more, I guess, what word am I looking for? Not, maybe it is experience, I guess, but I think it happens for a lot of them because everybody, and I'll use this as an example, clients will ask us, well, do they know this application, that application? So what we try to do is find people who have a high digital literacy. They have the ability to be able to adapt quickly to applications because they have that technology skill. So I think for a lot of them, they're all, picking up on new applications because everybody's using something different. So that's the reason why I use that. So it's hard to have people that know everything, that know them all. So it's best to just have the ability to be able to. So to answer, hopefully that answers your question. I think they're all always picking up on something as technology changes.
Okay, I think I got one more question. That is, so I've got this virtual assistant and I'm doing meetings in my company, team meetings. Do I include the virtual assistant or not?
I say it's up to It depends on how, to me, you're using them. And for us, a lot of times, my goal with this company is that they're an executive virtual assistant that are supporting the owner, the owner's right hand. So then it just depends on whether or not you feel like that person needs to be privy to everything that's going on in the company. Will that be helpful to them in their support role as they're supporting you? If you don't deem that it is, because they don't need to know all the rest of that, then I would say no. But because as I'm thinking off the top of my head, I know some clients include theirs in and some don't. So that's how I would answer that.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great. Well, Tanya, you sound like you're quite an expert on US-based virtual assistants, which is great. A lot of people prefer that, to have people in the US. And where can they go to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Sure. Our company website is teamdelegate.com. And I also have a podcast called Unbottleneck Your Business, and I am on LinkedIn. It's Tonya Thomas.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Tanya. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in today. I want to thank our sponsor, Habitly.com. Check it out. If you have anyone in your organization, including yourself, who might have one bad habit that's holding them back, 7 days free. You can't go wrong. There's 5-minute short episodes. There's hour-long full courses for the deep dive. Habitly.com, first 7 days free. If you liked this episode with Tanya, please subscribe, leave us a comment or a rating. We'd love to hear from you, and stay tuned. I've got more great guests coming. Bye for now.